This is a shiur in the inyan of Dirah b'tachtonim. Kemuvan, this sugya of Dirah b'tachtonim, as it's explained in Chassidus and especially in the Torah of the Rebbe, is aruka me'eretz mido rechava min hayam. There is many details, and each detail is kavei bracha la'atzmai, and deserves a shiur unto itself. And if one attempted to cover the entire scope of the sugya of Dirah b'tachtonim, this would take many hours. And obviously it's not possible to do this in the span of the hour that we have now for this shiur. So we're going to try keep it focused on, I guess, one prat. But this one prat is a prat ikri, and it's one of the, I think, in my opinion, greatest chidushim of the Rebbe, most amazing, mavhildike chidushim of the Rebbe in the sugya of Dirah b'tachtonim. And obviously, as the sugya of Dirah b'tachtonim is related, very closely related to the sugya of Achdus Hashem, so this is obviously a tremendous chidush in the inyan of Achdus Hashem as well. So we're going to try to stay focused on the purpose of this particular shiur, and not get sidetracked into many of the other important details in the sugya of Dirah b'tachtonim, which we'll have to leave for another time. It is a tifa inyan, so we have to focus and apply ourselves, and let's get into it. So gor b'pashtus, what's the idea? What's the idea of Dirah b'tachtonim? That the Eibishter wants. The Eibishter wants to be living b'tachtonim. The Eibishter wants to dwell in the lowest possible realm. He wants that the tachtonim should be a keli for elikus. Now, if we think about this, we can ask the simple question, and that is, what's the point? What's the point of the Eibishter dwelling b'tachtonim? What's the inyan in this? What's the maila? What's the maila b'zeh? What's the maila in having a Dirah b'tachtonim? So if we think about this, we can come up l'chayra with two klolistik biyurim, two general mahalchim. One is that if the Eibishter is dor b'tachtonim, and let's say if he's dor b'tachtoin shein tachtoin lamata mimenu, if the Eibishter could be nimshach and found, if the Eibishter could dwell in the lowest place, then this expresses, this highlights and brings out the toikev habligvul of elikus. Because anything which has some kind of a hagbala is obviously going to have a limit how far that could be nimshach. Ad poisavoi v'suloi. It can only come so far, and it cannot go any further. Only that which is betachlis habligvul, has no hagbolus at all, can be nimshach b'chol makom shehu. Has no hagbolus where it can or cannot go, and it can go anywhere. So therefore, what's the idea in Dirah b'tachtonim? Why is the Eibishter looking to dwell b'tachtonim? Why is the Eibishter seeking out to have amshachas elikus in a tachton, shein tachton lamata mimenu? It's because that will express the toikev habligvul of elikus. The Eibishter is so bligvul that he's able to be nimshach b'chol makom shehu, anywhere and everywhere, afilu in a tachton, shein tachton lamata mimenu. There's no place where he cannot reach. His hamshachas elikus can reach anywhere and everywhere. This is one way to explain the point, the inyan, or the maila, so to speak, in the idea of Dirah b'tachtonim. One mahalach. Another mahalach, very different, is to say that Dirah b'tachtonim expresses the emeskite of elikus. Meaning that elikus is so emes that everything has to be makir umasig umaskim to this emeskite. And as the Rebbe quotes from the Ralbag, one of the characteristics of emes is that everything around it, mikol tzad, is maskim to the emes. Nothing can contradict or conflict with the emes. Meaning, if the Eibishter would not be found in a tachten, shein tachten lamata mimenu, meaning if not for Dirah b'tachtonim, if there was ilu yitzuyah, there was a tachten in which there was no elikus, that tachten wasn't a keli for elikus, so that tachten wasn't makir in elikus. So that would automatically be a chesaron in the emeskite of elikus. Because there's a place, there's a nakuda, there's a realm which is not aware of the emeskite of elikus. So this is the idea of Dirah b'tachtonim. The fact that the Eibishter is dor b'tachtonim and b'tachten shein tachten lamata mimenu. What does that mean? That there is no place, there is no nakuda, there is no point, no realm in which they don't recognize the Eibishter. Elikus is so emes, elikus is so real, and so powerful, and so true, that it's impossible for there to be a metzias which is not maskim to this emes. It's impossible for there to be a metzias which is not makir ba'mitosai. So this is different to the first mahalach. In the first mahalach, the hadgasha is in the toikef habligvul of elikus. That the fact that the Eibishter is nimshach, even in a tachten, shein tachten lamata mimenu, this expresses the toikef habligvul. How the Eibishter has no hakbolas, he's able to reach even a tachten, shein tachten lamata mimenu. Whereas in the second mahalach, we're not focusing on the toikef habligvul, but we're focusing on the amitius of elikus, the emeskite of elikus, which misgula so emes, the characteristic of emes is that everything is makir umaskim to that emes. Ubemela, the union of Dirah b'tachtonim is the pshat that through the Eibishter being found and nimshach b'tachtonim and tachtonim being aware of the Eibishter, this brings out the amitius of elikus, that there's no metzius whatsoever which is not maskim and makir his metzius. Everybody knows it and is aware of it and agrees to it. Now, if we think about these two mahalchim, and we ask, my nafkamina, what's the difference? We'll say that the difference is if the emphasis is on the mashpia or on the makabel. That's the difference. In the first mahalach, the emphasis is on the mashpia, meaning we're discussing the toikef habligvul of elikus, and we're saying that here elikus, which is the mashpia, the Eibishter, the reason why he wants to be dar b'tachtonim is because that will express his toikef habligvul, meaning the koyach of the mashpia. It's all about milamayla lamata. It's all about the Eibishter reaching even the lowest place. So it's not so much, the emphasis here is not on the makabel being a keli. It's not on the kabbalas ha'oir. Avada, the tachtonim are makabel the oir. But the point, the bechein, isn't on the kabbalas ha'oir. The point is to show the bligvul of the mashpia. The mashpia is able to reach this low. If you have an isha chesed, how does the isha chesed demonstrate the toikef of his chesed? If he's only mashpia chesed to somebody that's close to him, it's nish kempela, not a big deal. That person is close to him and is a keli for the chesed, so it's not a big deal. How does the isha chesed demonstrate the toikef of his chesed, the bligvul of his chesed? If he could give chesed to a tachten, shein tachten lamata mimenu, he can give chesed even to mamish, a person who's not deserving. That will express the toikef habligvul, the toikef hakoyach of his chesed. So it's understood that it's not negeya here in vasfara oifen the makabel chesed is makabel the chesed. The point isn't on the Kabbalah Chesed. The point is, if the Isha Chesed is mashpia Chesed to a Tachten, she'ein Tachten lemata mimenu, the etzem hashba milamayla lemata, that's what brings out the Teikef HaBligvul of the Chesed. Derech said by the Eibishter. It's not important. The emphasis isn't in the first Mahalach on the Tachten being Mekabel, the Giluyoy. The point is the etzem fact that the Eibishter is able to be Nimshach in a Tachten, she Tachten lamata mimenu. He could be Megale Elikusoi. In Tachtoinim, das allein beweist, this itself is showing on the Teikef HaBligvul of Elikus, and the emphasis is on the Hashpas Elikus, as opposed to the Kabbalah Sa'ir. But if we think about the second Mahalach, in the second Mahalach, the emphasis is on the Kabbalah Sa'ir. Why? Because what's the second Mahalach? That the point of Dirah B'Tachtonim is that this brings out the Emeskait of Elikus. How? The fact that even a Tachten is Masig, Maskim, and Makir B'Mitosei. So, what's the emphasis here? The emphasis here is that the Tachten has to, mitzad his inyan, mitzad inyonoi, Tachten has to be Mekabel, this Gilu Elikus, and be Makir. If the Makabel is not Makir, it doesn't help that the Oy reaches him. The point is that after the Oy reaches him, he should grasp it and understand it and say, "Yo, ich bin euch maskim," that the Eibishter is emes. So it's all about the haskama and the hakara of the Makabel. So upazeh gufa, it could be in two efanim. When we talk about the haskama and the hakara of the Makabel in the Emeskait of Elikus, could be in two ways. One could be that a taka comes milamayla lamata. Taka comes mitzad the Eibishter's Gilu Elikus. But then, since the Makabel is a Keli, so he's able to internalize the Gilu milamayla, and once he internalizes it, so b'meila he has the hakara. So maybe he cannot come onto this hakara by himself. Ilule, the fact that the Eibishter revealed himself to the Tachten, he would never know of the Eibishter. But once the Eibishter revealed himself to the Tachten, and the Tachten is able to be masig, this Gilui, the Tachten can grasp the Gilui because he's a Keli to the Gilui. So now the Tachten is Mekabelit, and he's Mekabelit, he's Makir B'Mitosei Shal HaKadosh Baruch Hu, he's Maskim B'Mitosei, and this accomplishes the inyan of Dirah B'Tachtonim. So this is one way that it can happen. And there's another way that it can happen, and that is that the Tachten mitzadin yonoi milamata l'maylo can come to a hakara. He doesn't even need a gilu milmaylo. The Tachten could think about it and ask questions and be chayker v'doirish until the Tachten climbs higher and higher until he realizes, there is an Eibishter and the Eibishter is emes, and he can come to this hakara not milamaylo lamata, not because of a gilu milamaylo, but he can come to it milamata lamayla through bringing rayas from within the bria itself. But according to both ways, the point is that the emphasis within the second mahalach, whether the Makabel comes to the hakara mitzad gilu milmayla, or the Makabel comes to a hakara milamata lamayla through being mizbainen in inyonei habriya v'chulu. Both ways, the point in the second mahalach is that since Dirah B'Tachtonim has to demonstrate the amitiyus of Elikus, there has to be the Kabbalah, there has to be the Hakara of the Mata. Mashenkin in the first Eifin, that it's about the expressing the Teikef HaBligvul of Elikus, the emphasis is on the Hashpa, and what's doing with the Makabel is not important. Now, between these two Mahalchim, whether Dirah B'Tachtonim demonstrates the Teikef HaBligvul of Elikus, that it's able to be Nimshach even B'Tachtonim, or whether Dirah B'Tachtonim demonstrates the amitiyus of Elikus through the fact that even a Tachten is maskim and makir b'mitosei. The second mahalach is deeper. Second mahalach is higher. And here's why. Let's understand this back to our mashal from the Isha Chesed. When the Isha Chesed does Chesed, the pashtus, why is he doing the chesed? What's motivating him to do chesed? What's motivating him is his midas chesed. Because he is a chazdon, because he is a kind person, he has a tainug from doing chesed. So b'meila he wants to do chesed. Meaning, it's not about the makabel. It's not that the makabel is the one drawing out from within him the desire to do chesed. No, it's the midas chesed of the mashpia himself. He has a tainug in doing chesed that's causing him to do chesed. And if he doesn't do the chesed, he's going to have a tsar. Like we find by Avram Avinu, that when Avram Avinu didn't have any guests, couldn't do chesed, he was b'tsar. So when he was finally able to give the chesed, that gave him a tainug. So this is all chesed, the way chesed is mitzad the mashpia. If the focus is on the mashpia, so then it's like we said, the mashpia has a midas chesed that causes him to want to do chesed, and he does chesed. It's not so much about how the makabel accepts the chesed and takes the chesed. But we see that when takel poyel, the makabel ha-chesed is makabel the chesed, and the chesed is good for the makabel, and the makabel internalizes the chesed, and the makabel is changed by the chesed, then we see that this causes another tainug in the mashpia. Meaning, besides for the original tainug that he has, because he's a isha chesed, and he has tainug in doing chesed, in being mashpia chesed, but we see that when the makabel is makabel the chesed, the kabbalah chesed is goyrem even a deeper tainug in the isha chesed. He's not only now having tainug from the hashpah chesed, but he has a greater tainug from the kabbalah chesed, that the kabbalah chesed was also successful. Ublashan achsidus, that the shayresh hakelim is higher than the shayresh ha'oir. Meaning the Eibishter has, so to speak, the union of oir, that he wants to be mashpia, that he is mashpia. And that's also has a shayresh lamaila. The Eibishter has tainug from being mashpia. But the shayresh hakelim is even higher than that. Meaning when the tainug that the Eibishter gets from the oir being niskabel, b'pnimius hakelim, when the keli is able to absorb the oir and appreciate the oir, this is goyrem and even higher tainug in the Eibishter. So going back to our two mahalchim, comes out that the second mahalach is higher. In the first mahalach, where the emphasis was on the Eibishter's toikef abligvul, that he's mashpia even b'tachtoinim, so that brings about, so to speak, the tainug within elikus, that elikus has tainug from the hashpah chesed, from the hashpah oir. The Eibishter is mashpia oir even b'tachtoinim. That's one level. But in the second mahalach, where the emphasis is on the makabel, how the makabel is absorbing the oir, how the tachtoinim are maskim and makir in the emeskait of the Eibishter. So now that we have an inyan of kabbalah oir, we have an inyan of kelim, and we're focusing on the fact that the kelim are makabel the oir. This is causing in the Eibishter even a greater tainug, even a higher tainug. It's coming from a higher place than stam hashpah soir. And this fits very well with the two l'chayra similar sayings, but kadaikis, they're different. There's one saying where we say soif ma'aseh b'machshava tchila, and there's another saying where we say no, it's tchilasan b'soifa. And this fits in with these two mahalchim. The first mahalach, where we said we're focusing on the hashpah sa'oir milamayla lamata, the first mahalach, the taikef abligvul of elikus, that it's able to be nimshach lamato. So this is the idea of no, it's tchilasan b'soifon. That b'soifon, in the end, in the tachten, in the lowest place, that's where you can see the tchila, the taikef of the mashpia. As the lower the mashpia goes, the more safe, or when the mashpia comes to the level of saif, and he's able to reach even that tachtoinim, Now you can see Tchilas, and you can see the Toikef Habligvul of what that Oir is, that it's able to reach so low. That's not Tchilas and B'Seifa. But when we speak about the second Mahalach, how the Mekabel Ha'oir is then Mekabel and Makir Umaskib to Elikus. So this is the idea of Seif Maisa b'Machshava Tchila, meaning that in Seif Maisa, which is the Kabbalah Sashba, here you have Machshava Tchila. Machshava Tchila means what comes even before the Machshava. Machshava is the Shayrish of the Hashba. Like we said before by the Isha Chesed, that he's Mashpia Chesed, comes from his desire to do Chesed. That's the Machshava. Machshava Tchila is the Shayrish HaKelim, which is Nachtifer with the Shayrish HaOir. That's the Tainug which the Mashpia gets, the second Tainug which the Mashpia gets from the Kabbalah Chesed, when the Makabel is Makabel Chesed. So that's the Pshat, Seif Maisa b'Machshava Tchila, that the Seif Maisa, the Kabbalah Sashba, the Kabbalah Sa'ir, that reaches not only Tchila, but the Machshava Tchila. It reaches even before and even higher than the Shayr Sha'ir. Okay, that's parenthetic. Okay, Nachzalin Yonenu, getting back to the focus here. So we have these two seemingly good explanations into what's the idea behind Dirah B'Tachtonim, what's the mile in Dirah B'Tachtonim, what's the purpose of Dirah B'Tachtonim, and we're good. Here the Rebbe asks his bomb kasha. This is where everything changes. What's the bomb kasha? That we know that the Alter Rebbe said on the Lashon Nis'ave HaKadosh Baruch Hu, that the Eibishter had a taiva. So the Alter Rebbe said, as if a taiva is ken kasha nit, which means that, so to speak, the reason why the Eibishter wanted a Dirah B'Tachtonim is not something which is based on a reason. Rather, it's a taiva. It's l'mayla mitam v'das. It's l'mayla mitam v'das. If a taiva is ken kasha nit. It's not something which could be justified or rationalized. Dirah B'Tachtonim has to be something which the only explanation for it is nis'ave. So l'chayra al pi kol hanal doesn't make sense. Seemingly, Dirah B'Tachtonim is very logical. Dirah B'Tachtonim is very rational. It's not something about which we have to say that this is nis'ave and afatayves ken kasha nit. It's very logical. But the fact that the Alter Rebbe said that it's something which is a taiva, and it's lamayla mitam v'das, this means that it has to be the kavon in Dirah B'Tachtonim has to be something which is completely illogical, something which it's impossible to find any justification or any rationalization. Which means that all that we said before still is not the amitis ha'inyan of Dirah B'Tachtonim. The very fact that it could be somehow explained and rationalized means it's not Dirah B'Tachtonim. Dirah B'Tachtonim has to be something which is impossible to explain. And the only thing that we can say about it is nis'ave or nafatayves ken kasha nit. So we basically have to discard all that we said before and somehow explain Dirah B'Tachtonim in such a way which, so to speak, makes no sense, in a way which we cannot find any maila, any inyan, any purpose in it. So to understand this, let's turn to Tanya Perek Lamed Vav. And there in Tanya, when Alter Rebbe talks about the inyan of Dirah B'Tachtonim, he says that what does the Eibishter want? What kind of Tachtonim does the Eibishter want? He wants Tachten she'ein tachten lamata mimenu. That's the lashon of Tanya. Tachten she'ein tachten lamata mimenu. What does this mean? That the Eibishter wants a Dirah in the lowest possible Tachton, and the Tachton should be so low that it's not possible to imagine a lower Tachton. So it's the lowest possible Tachton one can ever think of. Now that has to mean, if it's the lowest possible Tachton, that has to mean that we're dealing with such a tachton that's hopeless. Because if we're dealing with a tachton that could be nis'ale, could be nisbarer, to eventually become a keli to a likus, then we understand that's not the lowest possible tachton. We can think of an even lower tachton, and that would be a tachton which is impossible to be nisbarer or to be nis'ale. So therefore, when we say tachton she'ein tachton lamata mimenu, that has to mean that the Eibishter wants a dirah betachtonim in such a tachton which is a lost case. This tachton is so far gone, it's so low, it's impossible for it to ever become a keli to elikus. It's impossible that elikus should be meir in this tachton, that this tachton will be makir in elikus. It is completely lost. And in the Lashon of Tanya der Perek Lamed Vav, he says, what kind of tachton are we dealing with? Tachton shein tachton lamata mimenu binyan hester oire yizbarach, v'choshech koful u'mechupal, ad shu moli klipos v'sitra achra shehei neged Hashem mamish, loimer aniva afsiyoid. So it's what he says. The tachton shein tachton lamata mimenu is such a tachton which is moli klipos v'sitra achra. Which moli klipos v'sitra achra means it's so full of klipos that it's not possible for this tachton to ever come around to being a keli telikus. Ad shehu neged Hashem mamish. It's a menaged telikus. This is the lowest possible tachton. What could be lower than this? Once we get to the point where the tachton is so far gone that it can never come back, it can never be a keli to elikus, it's menaged, it's neged Hashem mamish. Okay, so now we understand this is the lowest you can go. There's nothing lower. And this is the tachton which the Eibishter wants to have a dirah b'tachtonim in. So the shaila is, so how is this possible? If we're dealing with a tachton, which is molik lipis v'sitra achra, which is neged Hashem mamish, that it's impossible for this tachton to ever become a keli to a likus. There's not shaykh that it should be nisbarer, not shaykh that it should be nis'ale. So how can it become a dirah b'tachtonim? So obviously, the only way this can happen is b'derech ischatshus. B'derech ischatshus. That is going to be some kind of external koyach. And this external koyach is going to have the power, b'derech ischatshus, to somehow change this tachton and turn it into a keli to a likus, turn it into a dirah b'tachtonim. What is this koyach? This koyach is the koyach ha'atzmus. And who has this koyach ha'atzmus? This is Neshamas Yisrael. And only Neshamas Yisrael, with the koyach ha'atzmus that they have within them, have the power to transform this tachton, b'derech ischatshus, into a dirah b'tachtonim. Just like creation itself, we say it's only hu levade b'koyche v'yacholte livra yesh mi'ayin v'efes ha'muchlet mamish, that the koyach ha'isavus is dafke from atzmus. Only atzmus has this koyach, so al derech zeh is the inyan of dirah b'tachtonim. The inyan of dirah b'tachtonim, which is to take a tachton, which is ein tachton amata mimenu, which is a menage to a likus, which mitzad inyanoi is a lost cause. Mitzad inyanoi, it's not shaykh to ever be a keli to a likus. It's not shaykh aliyah, it's not shaykh birur, nothing is shaykh. So to take such a tachton and nevertheless, b'derech ischatshus, make it a dirah b'tachtonim, this is only b'koyach ha'atzmus. And this, again, this koyach is possessed by the Yidden, and they, b'derech ischatshus, will make a dirah b'tachtonim. And the fizeh kumtzu noch an oimek in one of the nekudas that we say about dirah b'tachtonim. Generally, we say that in dirah b'tachtonim there are two key factors. Number one, that the Eibishter wants a dirah latzmusai. The Eibishter wants to be dor b'tachtonim b'chol latzmusai, not just higher madregas of oir, but he wants to be dor b'chol latzmusai, and also that it should be begilah. So in this first nekuda, that the Eibishter wants to be dor b'tachtonim b'chol latzmusai, it's a dirah latzmusai mamash, not just a lower madregas. Now we understand a whole new oimek in this. It's not only a technicality. It's not just that the Eibishter wants to be dor b'chol latzmusai. The Eibishter wants to be dor not just on the level of oir, in the level of Giluyim, but he wants to be Dor on the level of Atzmus. It's not a technicality. It's the only possibility. Because again, since we're dealing with a Tachton, which is completely lost, it's Molik Klipis V'Sitra Achra, it's Neged Hashem Mamish, it can never be Nis'ale, it can never be Nisbarer. So mitzad any madreges of Giluyim, mitzad any madreges of Oir, they can't reach that. There's no way for them to ever penetrate, permeate that kind of Tachton. They can never be meir in that kind of a Tachton. So a Dirah for any madrega of Oir is pashat not shaykh in this Tachton. The only part of Elikus which could be Dor B'Tachtonim is Atzmus. Only Atzmus, which is Kol Yochel, V'Noiseh HaFachim, which has no Gedorim and is L'mayla Mikol, L'mayla Mi everything. Only Atzmus can be Dor in such a Tachton, which is Neged Havaya Mamish, Molek Klipos V'Sitra Achra. So it's not just a technicality that the Eibishter wants to be Dor B'Tachtonim B'Chol Atzmusay. The only part of Elikus which could be Dor B'Tachtonim is Atzmusay. Any lower Dargi in Elikus wouldn't be possible for that to be Dor B'Tachtonim, because we're dealing with a Tachton which is Molik Klipos V'Sitra Achra and Neged Hashem Mamish, which is a lost case and can never be a Keli to Elikus. So that's what the Dirah is Dafke B'Tachtonim. The Dirah is Dafke L'Atzmusay. So now we understand why this idea of Dirah B'Tachtonim is not something which you can give any reason for. We asked before, the Chayra, we can find justifications for Dirah B'Tachtonim. Why did Alter Rebbe say that it's beged in Nis'ave or Nafatayves can kashen it? So now we understand. If we're dealing with a Tachton that you could be Mevarer, if we're dealing with a Tachton that could be Nis'ale, that could become a Keli to Elikus, then in Achanami, we would understand that there's an Inyan in Dirah B'Tachtonim. There's a mile in Dirah B'Tachtonim. Something is being achieved. And we wouldn't have to say that it's Nis'ave. Afatayves can kashen it. But now that we understand that we're dealing with a Tachton that is ein Tachton Amata Mimenu, so low that it cannot mitzad in Yono, he cannot ever be a Keli to Elikus. The only way to make it Dirah B'Tachtonim is using the Koyach HaAtzmus, which is Noiseh HaKol, Noiseh HaFachim, Kol Yochel. And then, even that, we have to be poil in the Tachton B'derech Ischachus, so we understand that now we're dealing with something which has no place whatsoever in Seichel, in logic. What's the point? What's the point of taking something which is Mitzad Inyonai completely lost? It's not shaykh to be a Keli to Elikus, not shaykh to be a Dirah B'Tachtonim. And the only way that you can make him a Dirah B'Tachtonim is utilizing the Koyach HaAtzmus, which is Kol Yochel. There's absolutely nothing achieved here. There's no Maila, there's no Inyan which is achieved. You didn't show how Elikus can reach the lowest place. You showed how, because we're dealing with such a place that Elikus cannot reach. And the only way to make a difference is B'derech Ischachus. You have to completely change it. That's to be a Chidush. Al derech B'riya Yesh Meyayin. So if you're Al derech sort of creating a new Metzias, if the old Tachtonim is not what's being made into a Dirah B'Tachtonim, instead, we're B'derech Ischachus creating a new Metzias, we're breaking the old Metzias and creating sort of a new Metzias. It's a whole new transformation. So, what did you show? You didn't show anything. You didn't show how a Tachton could become a Keli to Elikus. You just showed how there was a Tachton which was a lost cause. So, B'derech Ischachus, we had to transform it and make something which is a Dirah B'Tachtonim. So, B'mei, it's understood why such a Dirah B'Tachtonim we can offer no reason or justification for it. There's no point to it. It doesn't make any sense. It seems like a complete waste of time, a complete silliness. The Eibishter wants to be Dor B'Tachtonim, but the Tachton he can't be Dor in unless he himself with his Koyach transforms it into something that he could be Dor in. So it's just circular logic. It's just going nowhere. Nor v'den is Ave. When Afatayvas can cash it. But we can't end over here because we still have to develop this a little bit more. L'chayra, the way we're saying it now, it's not enough. It's time to say that the Yidin b'koyach ha'atzmus u'b'derech ischachus are going to make a Dirah B'Tachtonim, and it's not at all mitzad the Tachton itself. It's kol kulei coming from the outside. B'derech ischachus, it's still lacking. L'chayra sof kol sof, no matter what we say, the union of Dirah b'tachtonim has to be coming mitzat tachtonim. Has to be coming mitzat tachtonim. If tachtonim themselves are completely lost, and it takes something from the outside, derech hischatshus, to make a Dirah b'tachtonim, it's not b'tachtonim. It's not mitzat tachtonim. So how in this explanation that we gave, where do we see the fact that despite the fact that it's coming b'kayach ha'atzmus, through neshamas Yisrael, and b'derech hischatshus, that still it's mitzat tachtonim? So here the explanation is as follows, and this I think is the most amazing part of this whole hezbollah, the chidush ha'ila al kulanu. When we think about Achdus Hashem, so usually we understand what's about Achdus Hashem, that everything is bottled elikus. That even though things may appear to be a yesh, and things may feel to be a yesh, but be'emes, einoid milvadei altes elikus. Altes elikus. Everything is bottled betachlis abitul. This is B'Pashtus, that's how we understand Achdus Hashem. But maybe we can suggest something a little bit deeper. This explanation of Achdus Hashem, that everything is bottle, that everything is elikus, is only Achdus Hashem on the darge of Oir. Mitzad Giluyim. Mitzad Giluyim, in what is expressed, the inyan of Achdus Hashem, as altes elikus. Einoid milvad. There's nothing else. However, mitzad atzmusa yizborech, mitzad atzmus, we can say something even deeper. Here we can say that Achdus Hashem includes and operates even on the level where there is a yesh. And the yesh is margish itself as a yesh mamish mitziyusay miatzmusay. It doesn't feel any bittul. It's mamish a grobe yesh. And that is still included and within the inyan of Achdus Hashem. Because we know that, it says in Chassidus in many places, the hergish of mitziyusay miatzmusay, which is in the yesh hanivra, comes from the yesh hamiti. Since, as we said, only Yatzmusay Mehusay She'enli Ila V'Siba Kedemesloi B'Koiche V'Yecholtoi Livra Yesh Meyayin. So since the Yesh HaNivra derives directly from the Yesh HaAmiti, so just like the Yesh HaAmiti is Be'emes Mitziyusay Miatzmusay Enli Ila V'Siba Kedemesloi, so the Yesh HaNivra, which comes from the Yesh HaAmiti, likewise has this hergish of Mitziyusay miatzmusay, as if ein le'ila v'siba kedemesloi. It's margish itself as a yesh. So therefore it comes out that on the level of atzmus, the Achdus Hashem doesn't require that everything be bottle. Doesn't require that everything be ayin ve'efes. No, we can say that even in that level, even in that place, where the Yesh HaNivra is margish, Shemitziyusay miatzmusay, the Yesh HaNivra is a grobe yesh, he doesn't feel any bittul, he doesn't feel a likus. He only feels zichalein. That in itself is a direct result from the Yesh HaAmiti. It's an expression of the Yesh HaAmiti. So we see a likus not just in the bittul, but in the Yeshus Mamish we see Elikus. The Yeshus itself is Elikus. It's a whole different word. Achdus Hashem on the Darg of Oir is the Pshat. Oir requires everything to be bottle. Everything to feel Elikus. Everything to be Elikus. There's no room for a Yesh. That's Mitzad Gilui. But Mitzad Atzmus, was Atzmus Mont, is not bittul. Atzmus is noisei that even the yeshes of Metzias, and it's a real yeshes, he didn't change it. It's a geblieben yesh, un a grobe yesh. Even that is not a stira to Atzmus. It's not a stira to Elikus. Ha guf is mitzad Elikus. Mitzad the Yeshua Amiti. The Yeshua Amiti, which is the emes mitziyusam yatzmusay, that is expressing itself in the fact that the nivra, which comes from him, is margish mitziyusam yatzmusay. So now let's take this back to Dirah B'Tachtonim. If we're dealing with Dirah B'Tachtonim on a madrega of Giluyim, so what would Dirah B'Tachtonim mean, B'Tzad Giluyim? That the Tachtonim should become bottle. Tachtonim should become a keli to Elikus. Tachtonim should be meir in Tachtonim dinyan of Achdus Hashem. That would mean that the Tachtonim become ois metzias, they become ois yesh, they become this batter, they become this battle, and Elikus is meir in them. So that's Dirah B'Tachtonim on the darga of Giluyim, and we understand that that's only shayich in a Tachton which could become a keli to Elikus. A Tachton which could become bottle to Elikus, in there is shayich a Dirah B'Tachtonim. But once we reach the Tachton, shein Tachton lamata mimenu, which is not shayich for that Tachton to ever become ois yesh, it's molik klipis v'sitra achro, it's neged Hashem mamish, it can never be a keli to Elikus. So mitzad Giluyim, it's completely lost. The union of Achdus Hashem can never include that. That Metzias can never become bottle, but Meil it can't be a Dirah B'Tachtonim. But on the level of Atzmus, the Dirah B'Tachtonim can happen even in that place, even in that Tachton, which is Margish Mitziyusam Yatzmusay, and will always be Margish Mitziyusam Yatzmusay. It will never become this battle. It will never become this barer. It will never be a keli to Elikus. Evet bleiben b'yeshusay u'mitziyusay lo netzach. Nevertheless, Atzmus could be nizgala in that, because it could be nizgala that ha gufa, the yeshus of Welt, the grubbe yeshus of Welt, the mitziyusam yatzmusay, which is stuck in that mitziyusam yatzmusay forever. It can't even climb out of that. That in itself isn't a stira to Elikus. When Atzmus is revealed, b'koyach ha'atzmus is ken izgala, and that in itself is a bitoy of the mitziyusam yatzmusay of the Yeshua Amiti. And lahor, just to be meisif a little bit oimek in here, this word, the Yesh HaNivra, has a direct correlation to the Yeshua Amiti, and the mitziyusam yatzmusay of the Yesh HaNivra comes from the mitziyusam yatzmusay of the Yeshua Amiti, now takes on a whole new oimek. Pashtus we learn simple. There's a Yesh HaNivra is margish mitziyusam yatzmusay, and that comes from the Yeshua Amiti. According to what we're saying now, that what kind of Yesh HaNivra are we talking about? What kind of Tachton are we talking about? A Tachton that it's not shayich for him to ever become this barer on his ale on his battle. So it comes out that the mitziyusam yatzmusay of the Yesh HaNivra is behechlet. It's not a temporary state. We're talking about a Yesh HaNivri which is muchrach forever. Evet almol bleiben in this matziv of mitziyusam yatzmusay. It's a yeshus which it's stuck in that yeshus. Yeshus behechlet. And that comes from the Yeshua Amiti. And it's perfect, because the Yeshua Amiti is mitziyusam yatzmusay. Be'emes, lo netzach, mechuyev, muchrach azay, behechlet azay. So what kind of Yesh HaNivra comes from the Yeshua Amiti? The Yesh HaNivra which comes from the Yeshua Amiti is not a Yesh HaNivra which is temporarily margish mitziyusam yatzmusay, but could eventually climb out of it and become bottled. Just like the Yeshua Amiti can't climb out of his being mitziyusam yatzmusay. So al derech the Yesh HaNivra which comes from the Yeshua Amiti is such a Yesh HaNivra that he can never climb out of his being mitziyusam yatzmusay. He can't climb out of his hargoshas atzmai. He will never become this battle. He will never feel his mocker. He will always remain a yesh that doesn't feel the mocker, that feels mitziyusam yatzmusay, just like Atzmus is that way. Behechlet. And yet we can see the union of Dirah B'Tachtonim because mitzad Atzmus, that yeshus itself not will become this battle, not will become this barer, that yeshus itself can be seen as sort of being a keli to Atzmus, or can be seen as being a bitoy of Atzmus. That yeshus is the gilui ha'atzmus. So this is a little bit moisif oimek in this word that Dirah b'tachtonim is only latzmusay. It's not shaykh that Dirah b'tachtonim should be for the dargas of Giluyim. Giluyim can never reach this tachton. Giluyim monen bittel. Giluyim monen ois metzias. But a tachton which is always going to be stuck by mitziyusay, Giluyim can never reach. Dafke, the Dirah is latzmusay, dafke mitzad atzmus, shaykh, sort of this inyan of neise hofchim. Both sides. That mitzad echad, it's a grabba yesh, and it will always be a grabba yesh. It's not being this battle. It's not being this bara. And mitzad sheni, that gufa is atmos. Das allein is atmos. So this is how the inyan of Dirah b'tachtonim is also mitzad tachtonim. That says from within the gedarim of tachtonim, within the gedarim of the yesh hanivra, that he is moli klippus v'sitra achra, and he's a yesh mamish, and he's magish mitziyusam yatzmusay. From within that, we come to the inyan of Dirah b'tachtonim by understanding that this gufa is a bitoy of atmos. This gufa is atmos. But we understand at the same time that this is not the pshat that the tachtonim mitzad inyonim can ever reach this. Because tachtonim mitzad inyonim are a yesh, and they'll always be a yesh, they mitzad their inyan can never climb out and see that our yeshes is mitzad the yesh amiti. It's not something which comes mitzad the tachtonim. It's always going to come ilamayla. It's always going to be coming mitzad atzmus, as we said before. The neshamas yisrael b'koyach atzmus b'derech hischachus. What's the hischachus? The hischachus is that they're going to be able to instill within the nivroim, within the yesha nivra, instill this inyan that your yeshes gufa is elikus, your yeshes gufa is atzmus. So this is a whole new ischachus. It's not something which the yesh hanivra mitzad atzma is shaykh to. The yesh hanivra mitzad atzma is only a yesh. But the neshamas yisrael b'koyach atzmus, they can mechadish zayin within the yesh hanivra, this understanding, this feeling that the yeshes itself is atzmus. The yeshes itself is atzmus. But when they do that, we understand it's not completely mibachutz. At the same time, it's also, now we can see how it's mitzad the tachton itself. Okay, we were mayrich. Hopefully the inyanim at the end are inyanim dakim. Hopefully the inyan is klar, and somehow we're going to walk away with a bigger appreciation of the inyan of the Hemshach to the Shiur. In the inyan of Dirah b'tachtonim, I just wanted to go back to one of the nekudas that we discussed, and maybe sharpen it a little bit more, make the point a little bit more clear. And that's the word that the Yesh HaNivra is a bitoy of the Yesh HaAmiti. And we explained that in Vas Pashteit, the Yeshes of the Yesh HaNivra is Yeshes of Mitziyusay Miatzmusay, that it's Pashteit in such a Yeshes that it's Tachten Shein Tachten Lamata Mimenu. It's not shaykh to be in his battle or in his battle. So, to put it in other words, we can say like this, that just like the Yesh HaAmiti, the Yesh HaAmiti, his Mechoyev HaMetzias, his Metziyusay Miatzmusay, is Ba'ofen Chiyuvi, Ba'ofen Muchlati, Ba'ofen Atzmi. Or in other words, his Metziyusay Miatzmusay Betachlis Be'ili Achar Ili Ad Ein Sof in the inyan of Metziyusay Miatzmusay. His being Mitziyusay Miatzmusay She'ein Le'ila V'siba Kedemes Lei, that is an inyan in him which is so strong, it's bligvul strong. He's bligvul in the inyan of Mitziyusay Miatzmusay. He's muchlet to mechuyev in Eifen Atzmi Ba'aliyas Ad Ein Ketz in the inyan of Mitziyusay Miatzmusay. And therefore this inyan translates to the Yesh HaNivra as well. Because the Yesh HaNivra comes from the Yesh HaAmiti, so therefore the yeshus of the yesh hanivra is also in such a way that the yesh hanivra is margish mitziusa miatzmusay, and he's a yesh b'yerida acha yerida ad ein ketz. Bli gvul in the inyan of mitziusa miatzmusay. It's the hargoshas, the yeshus, the hargoshas mitziusa miatzmusay of the yesh hanivra is bli gvul. Ba'ofen muchlati, ba'ofen chiyuvi, ba'ofen atzmi. Which is why it's a tachten shein tachten lamata mimenu. That's mamash the pirush of the Werte. Tachten shein tachten lamata mimenu means that it's ad ein sof. It's tachten achar tachten achar tachten achar tachten ad ein sof. Bli gvul yeridus in the inyan of tachten, in the inyan of yeshus. So the yeshus of the yesh hanivra is ad kedei kach shein tachten lamata mimenu. B'yerida achar yerida in inyan of yeshus of mitziusa miatzmusay, because it comes from the yesh ha'amiti, which is mitziusa miatzmusay mechoiva ha'mitziyas be'ilui achar ilui adayin ketz. He's bli gvul in the inyan of mitziusa miatzmusay. Okay, and lefiza comes out the inyan nifla, that in a sense the lower the yesh hanivra goes in his tachtonius, mitzad echad, it's moving further and further away from elikus, but mitzad sheni, it's moving closer. According to the end vort, that the yeshus of the yesh hanivra is atzmus, nemtzach van atzmus, from the yesh hamiti. So the more low the yesh hanivra goes, the more it's expressed the tachten shein tachten lamata mimenu, that his argoshas mitziyusa miatzmusay is b'yerida acha yerida ad ein ketz. He's bli gvul in the inyan of mitziyusa miatzmusay in his yeshus. The more it's mevate in the tzad hatoiv, in the tzad hakdusha, on elikus, on atzmus, his mitziyusa miatzmusay be'ilui achar ilui ad ein ketz. Ba'ofen muchlati, ba'ofen chiyuvi, ba'ofen atzmi. That's one heisafa that I wanted to say. The other one is just to clarify that even according to this end vort, Dirah b'tachtonim is not pshat. It's not a birur in the tachten. It's not an ali in the tachten. Since we're dealing with the tachten, that's ein tachten lamata mimenu. That's margish mitziyusa miatzmusay, as we just said now. Lamata b'yerida acha yerida ad ein ketz. So even after the inyan of Dirah b'tachtonim, that's not lost. Even when the tachten even when the Dirah b'tachtonim is actually happening, it's not pshat that the tachten lost its tachtonius. It's not pshat that the tachten is no longer margish mitziyusa miatzmusay. It's still a tachten b'tachlis. What we're going to have is an inyan of noisa hafachim, that mitzad echad tztake a tachten shein tachten lamata mimenu, tztake a yesh atzum, but at the same time, in the way of noisa hafachim, that in itself is directly a bitui of atzmus, and therefore that ability does not come from within the yesh hanivra itself to be able to be noisa hafachim. It comes from the kayach atzmus, which you didn't have, to be able to instill that within the nivra. So it's still going to be b'derech ischachus, because to be poil within a nivra that it should be noisa hafachim is a chidush. Ba'ofen ischachus legamri. It's not something which is shaykh to the nivra mitzad atzmai. But at the same time, once it's done, once the inyan is nifal, once the Dirah b'tachtonim is nifal, it's realized, then we can see that it's not kol kulei mitzad zaytik ezach, but it is connected to and coming from within the tachten itself.